This is one of those things that makes me kind of cringe when people say, oh, we really have to vote for Biden. That's going to make the big difference. Like, of course, you should vote for Democrats in general, like for the harm reduction purposes. But when people are like, oh, we need to prevent Trump from getting into office because then they will push Project 25. But we're here during the Biden administration now. And one of the things that we get to deal with is people who work at the federal level of the House of Representatives introducing bills like this one that would enact the death penalty for people who assault children, people who do CSA. So, and like ostensibly, that's the thing that everybody should be able to get behind, right? It's framed as like, well, of course, you can't. She's this lady who introduced the bill. She is from Florida. She represents Florida in the United States House of Representatives. She said, you cannot rehabilitate a child predator. It's a bill called No Repeat Child Sex Offenders Act. Apparently, it also works to tackle trafficking as a whole. I guess either death penalty or life in prison. You cannot cure predators. I don't need this. Like, ostensibly, of course, everybody is against harming children. Like, unless you're one of the very few people who has the desire to do that. But that's what makes that kind of rhetoric so dangerous, because it's so easy. Like, oh, you're supposed to get this automatic agreement. And if you don't get automatic agreement, then people are like, well, why do you support? And it's like, no, that's not what I said. Just trying to make sure that we acknowledge that this is a very easy way to paint someone as inherently permanently harmful, And it's really especially important that we be skeptical of these things in a political climate in which people are constantly calling trans people groomers and child molesters. Like, people are constantly accusing trans people of, wanting to sexualize children. So if you are doing both of these things at the same time, where on one hand, you're trying to expand the death penalty to include instances of child abuse like this. Like, to be clear, they're not introducing a federal bill that's going to make child abuse illegal. They're okay with parents assaulting their children, like hitting them and like harming them in that way. What they aren't okay with is like particularly sexual abuse, or at least that's what they say. But again, the kind of people who rail on about how much they hate these groomers and these people who want to hurt children, they also tend to support like child marriage, people getting married with parental consent at age like 14, so they keep saying one thing and then doing another. If you're enjoying this video, hit the like button, maybe subscribe, hit all notifications if you want. Feel free to check out the links in the description. You might find some merch you like, or you can hit up the Patreon to support the content and find free stuff. This is a thing that you need to integrate deeply in your brain, is that people will say the opposite of what they're actually doing. And if you keep observing them and you keep going, well, they're not doing such and such, they said they wouldn't do such and such, and you're like ignoring the thing that they're actually doing, like, how is that consistent? And also you're showing yourself to be pretty gullible if you are seeing someone say, we are against harming children, but they make exceptions for intersex babies, or they make exceptions for child marriage if the parents consent. It's just pretty abhorrent that they would lie like that. And you have to be smart enough to actually infer someone's intent by their actions, because a lot of the time you cannot take people at their word. Yeah, it's a chain with two links. The first chain is make it so that people who harm children are being killed or jailed forever. And then two, label all of the people that you hate as like people who harm children. Because listen, like, trans people are not unique in this. Not only has this happened to gay people in the past, but also Democrats as a whole group. Like, I realize that I have never talked about this extensively on my channel because it's just a level of crazy that I don't really feel the need to delve into. But QAnon is at its core a conspiracy theory about a child sex trafficking ring being run by Democrats, ostensibly in the basement of like a pizzeria or something like that. Like it's a dumb conspiracy, right? But this tactic of accusing groups you dislike of being like sexually harming children, it's just a really easy go-to way of making any average person, that's the goal is to invoke this like legal thing that I hated RGR introducing me to this term. Like if any reasonable person, so it's literally argument ad populum. Like, so if any reasonable person would be opposed to harming children, oh, any reasonable person understands that letting kids play dress up if it happens to be drag is like sexually inappropriate. You know what I mean? So they just kind of keep putting this forward that, oh, these people are harming children. No, you can't trans the children. Then it's harder for us to put them in the mines. Yeah. And like, yeah, exactly. These are the same people who are trying to remove protections for underage workers. Like they're trying to make child labor a thing again. People have been scapegoating their enemies as child predators for millennia. See the concept of Jewish blood libel. Yeah, interesting that there's no law saying that governments are failing in their duty to feed homeless people, but there are laws against just going out and feeding the homeless yourselves. Yeah, unless it's through an approved 501c3. Like I couldn't go out. I guess I could go buy lunch for an individual homeless person, but if I set up a table and I'm giving out food, even if it's food that I bought, I might not be able to like be allowed to do that depending on where I live. Yeah, like the social murder aspect of it, the fact that that's not seen as harmful or neglectful, allowing a state apparatus to decide what is appropriate behavior for people is clearly not working. You know, like cannabis is still illegal on the federal level, despite the fact that Biden promised he would change it, and that like it's not even a law that needs to pass. It's just that what is it? Is it the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, like, or the DEA? It might be a DEA thing. I can't remember. Anyway, like they just need to reclassify cannabis to not being a Schedule 1 thing, and that is not a legislative process. That's just an administrative process, and yet it hasn't been done. You know, like so many different things. Like I could go on and on and on. Like the people want access to abortion, but there is a potential for us to lose access to abortion even on the federal level. Arizona, I think, just made a really hardcore anti-abortion law, which might be being held in the courts already. Like that's just a development that happened over the last couple of days. But yeah, like it just seems to me like this apparatus that it's like, okay, so the government sets the definition for what counts as child abuse. And then there's a bunch of bureaucratic processes in the enforcement of that law. And so much of this is up to interpretation. And like, yeah, so you can just say, like in Arkansas, they tried to pass a law that would put using the restroom at the same time that a child was in that restroom, if you're trans, like they would make that equivalent in punishment to the kinds of crimes that involve like physically sexually harming a child. So you can set this definition, or like the censorship law that they're trying to pass here in Kansas where I live right now, that in the definition of sexual content that they're trying to keep away from children, they're like, this includes acts of masturbation, homosexuality, sexual intercourse. So acts of homosexuality, what the hell does that mean? You know, they put it there with sex and masturbation, equivocating any homosexual activity to literal like sex in public, you know, like, and it just seems like a bad system, you know? Yeah, the return of the anti-sodomy laws. We've talked about this recently on the channel, you know, just because these laws aren't being enforced now doesn't change the fact that they're on the books and that malicious actors will use these to restrict LGBTQ rights. Like that lady we talked about in Ohio. She was a trans woman who tried to run for a local office, and they ended up barring her from participation because they were selectively applying a law where you're required to publicly state your former name on your petition. There were 3 other transgender women, I think, trying to get positions in politics in Ohio at that time. none of those 3 women were disqualified the way that Vanessa was. So they just are going to selectively apply it. And there is it's an entire possibility that those other trans women could be removed from office later if there were some challenge based on that law. Yeah, peeing outside is treated like a sex crime. Like, pissing outside is a sex crime that will get you put on a sex offender list that will prevent you from like living too close to a school and stuff like that. You know what I mean? And it's like, I don't have a solution to this problem, but I feel like it is worth, you know, talking about the fact that, like, what do you do in a system where things are gerrymandered all to hell and that women like this get in power and they're like, we're targeting trafficking. I have the firm belief, which I think many of my colleagues also hold, that you can't rehabilitate a predator. We have to increase the federal minimums. It increases the federal minimums to death penalty or life in prison. It's absurd that rapists can get off after a few years of good behavior after destroying lives. Like, again, on its face, I cannot disagree with that. Like, I mean, I can say I don't think that they deserve the death penalty because I think that people can be falsely accused of all kinds of shit, especially in this day and age where you have like pretty advanced, you know, photo editing capabilities and like it's pretty easy to forge evidence. And while there is like a targeted campaign, whether it's trans people or whether it's gay people or whether it's just Democrats in general, having this cultural moment where you're accusing people of being like child assaulters, you have to be especially cautious. Oh yeah, she did say she would also be vying to increase the federal minimum for rapists in general. So it's not just, or I guess this particular law only has to do with children, but she wants to also craft legislation just generally increasing minimums for people in general. And like, yeah, I agree with, you know, Melena in the chat that a violent SA or like drugging someone is different from being like shitty about boundaries. So it's like, what are we calling rape? What's the definition of that? In a lot of current definitions, it's literally only a man penetrating a woman. That's the only thing that can be rape in some places. So you're like not going to catch all the people that you want to catch by this. And you are going to catch people who don't deserve to be caught up by it. Like, listen, guys, I don't doubt that it will be worse if Trump gets into presidency, like all this stuff. But I just want to point out that we are not necessarily safe under Biden either. Because if you can get enough Democrats on side, if you can convince enough Democrats, oh, we're just trying to prevent harm to children, you know, because of course, like when they pass this law, or if they pass this law, it's only a page and a half long. This lady who drafted it seems kind of proud of the fact that it's a super short law. So this law probably doesn't have anything to do with trans people directly. Okay? So this law that's just about increasing the penalties for child abusers in general, like child sex abusers specifically, there's a good chance this will pass. Okay? And then later, when they start prosecuting trans people for alleged crimes against children, you know, you have this sort of permissive federal law that says, yeah, you can punish them as harshly as possible, essentially. And that could happen once Trump is in office later. Like, we're setting things up now that are going to come to ripe fruition in a couple of years. Yeah, I agree. With Biden, we will be slightly safer than under Trump. But yeah, safety is always contextual. Even if you live in a super liberal area, you can still get curb stomped by somebody who just happens to have a problem with you. Under Democrats, it's more like less unsafe than being strictly more safe. Agree. It's like vaping is less unhealthy for you than smoking cigarettes, but it's not healthier, it's just less unhealthy. Yeah, the brief moment of totality is less unhealthy. So just to clarify, this is Representative Anna Paulina Luna. So if you live in Florida and it's possible for you to vote her out the next time she could be voted out, maybe do that. Choosing between the party of do nothing versus the party of make things worse. There's no improvement on the ballot. I hate it here. Yeah. Remember when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was like, we're going to do a Green New Deal. We're going to put all these emissions restrictions on these corporations and we're going to raise the minimum wage. And absolutely none of that has happened. We genuinely do not have a party that is seeking to improve any of these situations. There are individual Democrats who are working to make things better. And of course, I would never discredit the hard work that they do. But the Democratic leadership in this country just do not care about like the fact that there are a bunch of natural disasters. Because guess what? The more natural disasters there are, the more the various companies that they contract with can, produce flood gear and sell it to people and jack up the prices on the property insurance, like your home insurance. She came up against serious opposition when she introduced the Green New Deal, but didn't it sort of pave the way for that general philosophy to make more leeway in the following years? Like, maybe in the popular mindset, but like the popular mindset had already been thinking like Medicaid or Medicare for all or Medicaid for all. Personally, when it comes to our national politics, I am seeing a pretty dramatic capitulation to Republican ideals and very little I personally am not really seeing a lot of conversation or movement on these various things that we would associate with the Green New Deal. And there's just like not much you can do about it because these are the groups that are in power. They got in power, they're going to stay in power, and like we can't even discuss trying to change the governmental system in a short-term period of time. Because when you start having discussions about radically changing the government functionality in a short period of time, that's a crime against the government. The system has created a situation by which you can only work within the system or you will get punished like for the highest form of crime that they have constructed. I think the capitulation is Biden pulling his unity BS and trying to pull more reluctant Republicans to vote for him. It's more Clinton shit. Yeah, that's the thing too. They're just kind of drifting toward the right. It's insane too that they're drifting toward the right to try to get more votes because they're trying to get votes out of Republicans, But how many votes are they losing by refusing to capitulate to the left wing who like is a growing demographic, I believe. I haven't really looked into it specifically, but I would assume that the number of people who are dissatisfied with their wages and like who are dissatisfied with the increase in natural disasters, like people who are going to be increasingly upset about food shortages, like there are going to be more and more and more people who see the system not working and who are going to stop voting for the Democrats. The more the Democrats support Israel, the more votes they lose. The more they ignore climate change, the more votes they lose. The more money they give to police departments, the more votes they lose. Like, I just don't see the Democratic Party really recovering from how majorly they fumbled this presidency. Completely honest. Worth pointing out that neolibs like Reagan and Clinton were able to dismantle the welfare system precisely because white people voted against their economic interests to spite black people. I mean, yeah, there's that too. There's that too. If it's any consolation, the Republican Party seems to be speedrunning how fast they can kill themselves politically. But the thing is that the Republican Party is capable of drumming up like a loyal base of fanatics who do not think rationally, And I think that the core group of Republicans who will vote red no matter what is probably bigger and more galvanized than any number of people in the Democratic Party who are like, I'm going to genuinely vote blue no matter who, and I'm going to make sure that other people do as well. I honestly think Democrats just don't have the same sense of urgency because Democrats don't often use, like the Democratic politicians don't necessarily use fear in the same way to engender loyalty. Don't we have the right to revolution against our government if we deem it becomes destructive toward its citizens? I thought that was in the Declaration of Independence. Or have I sorely misunderstood something? The Declaration of Independence is not a law. And it's also different for the American colonists to reject British law versus them, like once they are in power, of course, they don't want to be rebelled against. Like you are charged with treason if you work against the interests of the US government. Or like, lots of governments have a concept of treason. Yeah, there are more Democrats, but Republicans have a very big enthusiasm advantage. Yeah, we're touching on this concept called the consent to be governed. And yes, today's treason can become tomorrow's regime. Like, if we were to try to radically change the government, so like we change it very thoroughly in a very short period of time, the system is going to resist that change, and it will use violence in order to preserve itself. RFK Jr. is going to screw Biden out of votes. I honestly think, did you guys see that guy? I guess we're done with this particular segment. Did you see that guy who's changing his name to literally anybody else? He did it. He legally changed his name. His legal name is literally anybody else. And it's like he's launching basically a joke presidential run, which I think is very funny. I'm considering voting for him. I live in Kansas, so my vote for Biden doesn't matter at all. How do we avoid that while still getting the results we need in a timely manner? So here's my deal. Because our economy is focused entirely on constant growth, it will collapse. Like the fact that we are not going to dedicate huge amounts of resources to moving all of our cropland hundreds of miles further north. And it's just, the government is going to collapse on its own at that point. Like, we just have to live for 20 years. You know what I mean? Like, on the downhill already. So it's just about like, okay, get your local communities in order, support each other, get each other to safer states, concentrate power in places where hopefully you'll be able to produce food on account of the climate change, food shortages and stuff. And yeah, it'll just do it on its own in a while. The end of the Republican Party is not the end of capitalism, but they're both going to be very violent and awful things to witness. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying it's not going to be crazy. I'm not really a fan of the predictions made by, quote, late-stage capitalist models. IMO, it undersells how titanic and slow the shift from feudalism to capitalism were. So to be clear, I was just using the term late-stage capitalism as shorthand because we've never seen this before. You know, like, we've never seen this exactly before. Vivi, I guess maybe you haven't been around, and I'm going to keep bringing this up for forever. There was a study out of MIT in 1972 where they created numerous economic models given certain variables. And in the economic model that they called their worst case scenario model, if policy kept going on supporting constant economic growth at the expense of other things, then the economy will stop growing around year 2040, and then the economy will collapse. And because of the fact that the pursuit of constant growth includes all this exploitation of the environment, then there are going to be like a large number of catastrophic events that result in a global population loss. Like, we're at almost 8 billion right now. If nothing changes, and if things don't really, really radically change for the better as far as our economic choices in the next 5 years, then we are on track for complete economic collapse that is going to reduce the global population from almost 8 billion back down to 2 billion. It's not going to be a good time. So when I say, I kind of casually said late stage capitalism, I don't even know if they referred to it in those terms in 1972, probably not. But it's just that constant pursuit of profit and economic growth over investment infrastructure. Yeah, those economists are the Cassandra prophets of our time. No one's going to listen to them. Okay, yeah, it's called Limits to Growth. That's the study out of MIT. Bellissimo. Okay. Thank you, my patrons, especially Tiago Nascimento, Mersh Rolvog, Amanda B., Michelle Frateroli, Wellington Marcus, Michelle Winter, Danielle McDonald, Suzanne Maynard, DZXN, Spooky Heather Sylvia, Ella V. Nobody, Pasnell Infinity, Jamie Jam, Sojo, Nova, Elizabeth Bartell, Athiet, Kevin Young, Desi Quiche, Celeste, Liam Hodgson, and Mr. Atheist.